Did Pfizer want to pursue a business deal with Theranos? No. And did Pfizer give Theranos the authorization to use their logo? No. And how do we know that? Because Shane Weber testified in the Sunny Balwani trial, just like he did in the Elizabeth Holmes trial, that Theranos did not have the authorization to use the Pfizer logo, and Theranos was not of interest. They were not interested. Pfizer was not interested in pursuing any business deals or making any financial interest in Theranos. And why is that? I'll show you Shane Weber's recommendation to Pfizer. I'll show you the due diligence questions he asked, and that NDA that I think prohibited Theranos from using the Pfizer logo. So please subscribe to my channel. If you haven't subscribed, please support my work by subscribing. To those of you who have subscribed, thank you very much for supporting my channel. And please do hit that like button, hit the bell notification. So this video is simply my opinion. It's for educational and informational purposes only. I'm Michele Hagan. I'm a legal analyst and a former prosecutor. You may recognize me because I provided a lot of legal analysis on the Elizabeth Holmes case. So we're going to take a look at the emails and some other emails that you may be interested in. So just in case you popped on this channel, Sunny Balwani is currently on trial for 12 counts of fraud, the same 12 counts that Elizabeth Holmes faced. He is the alleged co-conspirator. He is the co-defendant of Elizabeth Holmes. He was the COO of Theranos, a blood testing company that Elizabeth Holmes started. All right, so let's talk about Shane Weber. Let's talk about Pfizer, and let's talk about that Pfizer logo. And by the way, Elizabeth Holmes did admit that she did not have the authorization to use the logos, and that included Pfizer's logo, Shearing Plow's logo, and GSK's logo. I hope I got that right. So anyway, let's take a look at the NDA that I think also prohibited Theranos from using the Pfizer logo. So here it is. Let me show it to you. This is back in March 30th, 2006. And the timeline is going to be important for this video because the indictment in the Sunny Balwani case and in the Elizabeth Holmes case regarding the 6 investor counts, right, relates to a period of time of, they allege, 2010, the prosecution alleges, 2010 to 2015. So this NDA takes place before, okay, so we're looking at 2006. So this non-disclosure agreement is basically with Pfizer and Elizabeth Holmes, right? And then let me show you what I think is interesting in here that further prohibits Theranos from using Pfizer's logo. So let's go to paragraph, I think it's paragraph 5 here. You can go ahead and read this. Yeah, here it is. It says nothing in this agreement shall be construed as granting a license to either party, Elizabeth Holmes or Pfizer, to any patent rights or other intellectual property rights of the other party. Well, what's a logo? A logo is intellectual property. So it says right here in plain language, nothing grants you a license to use Pfizer logo. And guess who signed this? Elizabeth Holmes, CEO, on April 6, 2006. So right there, can't that be argued that she agreed? She wasn't given a license to use the logo? Okay, so let's get to Shane Weber. Shane Weber is a he's a scientist at Pfizer. All right, and these emails I'm going to show you is he was contacting Theranos because he was going to ask questions. He wanted to basically close the loop on all the inquiries that they were getting from Theranos to Pfizer to establish, to develop a relationship with Pfizer So Shane Weber was looking into, on behalf of Pfizer, looking into the Theranos technology and the devices. So let me get you to the beginning of this. And he asked a whole bunch of questions. You know, he was doing his due diligence, I think, you know, in my opinion. So here we go. Elizabeth Holmes. Now, again, this is November of 2008. So this is years before, but it does lay out, you know, what relationship did they have or have not with Pfizer? Okay, so here is Elizabeth Holmes to Craig Lipset at Pfizer. Craig, this is great. I've copied Gary Frenzel, who's the contact at Theranos. You make Gary your visit at Theranos. He runs our assay systems group, and he'll lead you to that study, right? This study that she wants to provide to Pfizer, so they can take a look at that. So here is Craig Lipset from Pfizer responding to Elizabeth Holmes and Shane Weber and Gary Frenzel. So putting all the people in the loop here. It says, Gary, please coordinate with Shane Weber from Pfizer, right? Who leads our diagnostic group. And then we get to Gary Frenzel reaching out to Shane Weber to Pfizer. Shane Weber at Pfizer, Gary Frenzel at Theranos. Hello, Shane, do you think your team will be available? So Gary, on behalf of Theranos, is reaching out to Shane at Pfizer. And here's a whole bunch of questions Shane Weber asks of Gary Frenzel. He's asking these questions of Theranos about the device. So let's see what he says here. He says, let me just double check here. Yeah, so on November 10th in 2008, okay, this is approximately a year and a half before the indictment dates. It says, hi, Gary, thanks for your prompt phone call. I'm sorry there have been multiple Pfizer points of contacts over the years. I am interested more broadly as to what the instrument is, the Theranos devices, and plan to be, and not just in understanding the performance and the utility of the Theranos systems in the oncology study. What he's referring to there is that Gary Frenzel, Theranos, had sent Shane Weber their oncology study, the conclusions that Theranos made regarding their study, and they were providing that to Pfizer to consider in their evaluation of whether or not they're going to be doing any business deals with Pfizer. So right here he says, I am responsible. So this is Weber saying, I'm responsible for the platforms for which Pfizer has a diagnostic interest and for which there is clinical validation. So maybe they have an interest in Theranos, but does Theranos clinically validate it? Then he says, if the platform is still in clinical validation, then I may introduce you basically to someone else. Okay, then he says, for me, the goal is to understand the Theranos system. So what does he say here? I have the Theranos summary to aid and power. In other words, Theranos provided a study of Theranos's conclusions, right? That they were providing to aid and power who worked at Pfizer. So he's saying, Shane Weber from Pfizer saying, yes, I've read that oncology study. I've read the conclusions that Theranos came to, but I have a whole bunch of other questions. And for all you scientists, I want to say thank you for your comments and for following my channel and for subscribing. And if you haven't subscribed, please do subscribe. But I thought it might be interesting to share these questions with everybody, you know, to see what you think. Here's his, Shane Weber's asking on behalf of Pfizer. I got a bunch of questions. What's the answer here? Would you please send, provide, or answer? Thank you. He asks, where are the assets? What are the assays that are currently run? How many assays are currently run in multiplex mode? What were the calibrators? What was the reference method used? How often is the instrument need to be calibrated? All of these questions, you can read them. I mean, I'm not a scientist, but I'm basically looking at this saying, well, he's asking a bunch of questions to figure out whether these devices work, how this whole process works, how their technology works, right? He's doing his due diligence on behalf of Pfizer. So he's asking a load of questions, right? Which you would expect, if you're going to be reviewing their devices and their technology. Is there an instrument version that measures single nucleotide, I'll let the scientists. Anyway, you can read this. Can the instrument take a swab sample? Blah, 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 right? So he's asking these questions of Theranos. And what does Gary Frenzel from Theranos respond? Let me scroll up here. He responds, "Hi guys, this is the response from Pfizer. We are not to respond yet." So he sent it to Ian Gibbons, who's working at Theranos, and it's from Gary Frenzel. That's what Gary says to the team at Theranos regarding the questions that Shane Weber is asking. All right, so now let's go and take a look at another. Here is Shane Weber's diagnostic review of Theranos and his final recommendations. Basically, this is Shane Weber's conclusion. After everything he looked at regarding Theranos, here's his recommendation to Pfizer. And I'll point you to the recommendations 1, 2, and 3. It says, number 1, Theranos does not at this time have any diagnostic or clinical interest to Pfizer. He's saying, based on his evaluation, his response to those questions, I guess, that he received, his looking at the study that was provided by Theranos, that Pfizer does not have a clinical or a diagnostic interest in Theranos. Number 2, it's recommended that no further financial investment or clinical sample resources be extended to Theranos. His recommendation is, Pfizer, don't make any further financial investments. Isn't that what he's saying here? And then he says, number 3, going forward, Theranos should be monitored by, you can read this, given Theranos, blah, 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 once every 6-month phone call by Theranos upon a significant improvement to their platform. So right here, he's saying that they need to make a significant improvement to their platform. And this is back in December 31st, 2008. This is prior to all the representations that the prosecution alleges that Sunny Balwani and Elizabeth Holmes made to these investors, right? Why did they put the Pfizer logo on those reports? Why did Elizabeth Holmes admit, she admitted in her trial, that she put those logos on those validation reports that were provided in that binder to several of those investors and prospective investors? Why did they use the Pfizer logo when in 2008, Shane Weber, and I'll show you the email referencing the call that he had with Elizabeth Holmes, basically telling Elizabeth Holmes, Pfizer's not interested. We're not interested. Okay, and I'll get to that in a second. But anyway, let's see what else he says here. He says that upon significant improvement in their platform. So he did, in his opinion, it's not ready. Theranos device is not ready. And then he says, to determine if Theranos has any demonstrated capability. So his conclusion in 2008 is they weren't ready. They didn't demonstrate the capability. The device was not capable of doing what they said, Theranos said it was capable of doing. And what did he base that on? Review and comments on Theranos provided information, on the information that Theranos provided to Pfizer. The technical assessment review process consisted of examining Theranos's confidential summary report, that report that they provided to Dr. Aidan Power, reading their public patent publications. So he read Theranos's patent publications, hearing their story. I think it's interesting he says their story, hearing their story in a 1-hour teleconference with questions and answers, reading their answers to a written set of technical due diligence questions, those are ones that I showed you, surveying the web for public information of interest, and discussing with 2 oncology therapeutic area leads their interest for potential utility in current or foreseen clinical trials. So I guess he had 2 other people review the study that was provided by Theranos, and Weber concluded that they weren't ready and that Pfizer should not have any further financial interest, and the Theranos technology was not of interest to Pfizer. During the process, Theranos provided summary reports on studies with GSK and Novartis. To date, they have not responded to requests confirming that these are non-confidential reports that can be shared with. And so these reports have been, there is no other page to this document, but you get the drift here. The drift is that Weber was concluding that the technology was not suitable basically for Pfizer, and that Pfizer is not interested in having a further deals, any other deals with Theranos. And how do I know that? Let's take a look. Here is an email from Shane Weber to Aiden, I think it's Aiden Power with Pfizer, basically telling, I think it's Dr. Power at Pfizer, what his conclusions were, and that he had had a call with Elizabeth Holmes, right? So let's go through this email. And this is January 30th. So this is approximately a month after he issues that recommendation to Pfizer. Basically, we don't need, Theranos is not of interest to us. And he's telling his colleague here, Aiden Power, who received that initial report, that oncology study report from Theranos. He's saying, hi, Aiden. Today I spoke with Elizabeth Holmes, CEO at Theranos, and explained to her that Pfizer did not have, at this time, a foreseeable use for the Theranos device. Pfizer did not have a foreseeable use of Theranos device. This is in 2009. What did Elizabeth Holmes and Sunny Balwani allegedly say to these investors in 2013 and 2014, who cumulatively invested 155 million into Theranos, right? Did they say that Pfizer examined, used? Let me show you. Here it is. The indictment right here. Did Balwani and Holmes represent to investors that Theranos technology had been examined, used, and validated? Well, Weber's telling in that recommendation to Pfizer, based on his analysis of the Theranos technology, and based on that email I'll get back to, when he says to Elizabeth Holmes, we have no use for your technology. But right here, the prosecution is alleging that they represented otherwise to these investors. In those binders, when they presented those validation reports with those logos, statements that Balwani and Holmes allegedly made regarding their relationships, right? And in particular, here's Pfizer. Pfizer, did they examine, use, or validate the technology? Well, I think Shane Weber is telling us otherwise. So let's get back to here. So he explained to Elizabeth Holmes that Pfizer did not have a foreseeable use. He says, I was polite, clear, crisp, and patiently firm as she pushed back. I guess that means Elizabeth Holmes didn't want to take no for an answer. No, Pfizer's not interested. We're not interested. He had to be polite, clear, and patient with her. I was polite, clear, crisp, and patiently firm as she pushed back. She asked for other names at Pfizer to approach. In other words, is there someone else we can talk to at Pfizer? And I politely deflected. So I guess that wasn't such a great, it sounds like it was probably a tense conversation with Elizabeth Holmes basically telling her, no, I looked at your stuff, I read your reports, I asked questions, I reviewed your questions, and my recommendation to Pfizer is, we do not at this time have a foreseeable use for your device. And then he says, I did receive confirmation that Theranos had been paid for the alliance contract, blah, blah, blah. And then he says, I can revisit Theranos if there are new needs which arise that Theranos can solve if their device is plausibly able to do so. So again, this is Shane Weber telling his colleague at Pfizer that, in his opinion, his review of the Theranos technology. It wasn't plausibly able to do so. It wasn't ready. It wasn't capable of what it claimed. I assume that's what Weber is saying, right? So let me see if there's anything else I wanted to point out to you. I think that's it. Yeah. So, what do you think? I think, in my opinion, based on that NDA where basically Elizabeth Holmes agrees to the statement that she doesn't have a license to use any intellectual property, yet she uses the logo. Did Sunny Balwani know about that? Well, I can tell you this much. I mean, the defense in the Balwani trial has several times tried to keep out those darn logos, the logos that appeared on those validation reports, because it's incriminating to Balwani, potentially, right? And here is, an agreement. Elizabeth Holmes agreed to not use any of the intellectual property, and she admits that she didn't have the authorization. And Shane Weber at Pfizer testified that Theranos did not have the authorization to use the Pfizer logo. And what about Pfizer's relationship with Theranos? Well, Shane Weber has told us, in these emails and in his recommendation, he advised Pfizer to have no further financial interest, and that the Theranos technology and devices were of no interest to Pfizer, and he told Elizabeth Holmes we had no foreseeable use of their device. So did they claim that Pfizer examined and used and validated the technology? Wow. So, that's a call that the Balwani jury is going to make. Did it, some of these counts are conspiracy. Don't you think that Elizabeth Holmes probably told Sunny Balwani what Shane Weber said to her, that we have no foreseeable use in your devices? I think, what do you think? Do you think she shared that with Sunny Balwani, that Pfizer said no? Boy, that's it's a call that the jury's going to make. But, the prosecution alleges that they made those misrepresentations, that they represented, that pharmaceutical companies like Pfizer, by using that logo, validated their technology. So we'll see what happens. So what do you think? Please leave your analysis. Leave a comment. Please subscribe to this channel. Hit that like button, the bell notification if you want to contribute. I left you the PayPal link in the description box below the video. So thank you very much for watching. Thank you for supporting my channel. And stay tuned. I'll have further videos.